Welcome everybody to this meeting of the Environment Scrutiny Committee. My name is Rob Bird as the chair of the committee, and this meeting is being held in the remotely under the auspices of the COVID regulations. My apologies, I just need to go back to the agenda, and it can be viewed on the County Council website at www.gloucestershire.gov.uk. We'll just work through the agenda. Item 1 is apologies. At the moment, we have apologies from Councillor Ward and Councillor Rippington, and we are waiting for Councillor Williams and Councillor Cromwell to join us, who we anticipate will do so shortly. Moving on to item 2, which is the minutes of our meetings held on the 15th of July and the 23rd of September, pages 1 to 14 of the agenda pack. Does anybody wish to make any comment about the minutes, or can we sign them off as an accurate record of what took place? Over to committee. Anybody wishing to? Councillor Hurst? You're on mute, Councillor Hurst.
Thank you, Chair. I propose we sign them off as a true and accurate record. Okay,
I have a proposer then for that. I didn't notice anybody wishing to make any comment, so no, in which case could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Orford, thank you. So it's proposed and seconded that the minutes are accurate, and therefore they will be signed off as a true and accurate record of our meetings. And whilst we've been talking, I noticed that Councillor Suzanne Williams has joined us. Welcome, Councillor Williams. So we shall now move on to the third item of the agenda, which is declarations of interest. Does any member have a declaration of interest to make? Please indicate now. And Councillor Orford, you've got your...
Just to recognise my normal ones around everything wet, Chair, because it might come up further in the meeting.
Fine. Thank you very much, Councillor Orford. It doesn't look, I'm just scrolling through here, it doesn't look as though any other member is looking to make a declaration. So that's fine. Thank you very much, all of you. So we shall move on then to item 4, which is what is known as motion 861, which was a motion to the council on climate change, pages 15 to 34 of the agenda pack. I think, I'm pretty sure that the way we're going to run this is a short introduction from the cabinet member responsible, Councillor Moore, and then the proposer of the motion, Councillor Kate Haig, will have the opportunity to present, and then we to the officer report on the matter. So over to you, I think, Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everyone. Really, my opening remarks really are an apology, because I want to apologise for the late delivery of this report, replying to Council Motion 861. I wanted to give you just a bit of background as to why we find ourselves in this position. In addition to this report, officers have been working on our annual report for the December Cabinet on our response to the climate change emergency. While we were doing that, we received news of an opportunity to bid for government funding for our decarbonisation programme. As probably most of you are aware, these bids are announced with little warning, and officers have had to respond quickly. So in essence, officers have had quite a major workload this past few weeks. What are we going to do about it? Well, I've discussed with Colin Chick and Philip Williams, and we are starting on a recruitment programme to remedy this shortfall in our capacity, which I hope will mean in future we can respond to the work programme of this committee, because I do regard this committee as a very important committee, and I've always tried to participate fully in its work in a more timely manner. This report is a response to that motion and really sets out really an assessment of what happened during the early weeks of COVID in terms of the change in behaviour, particularly with regard to transport, and tries to draw some conclusions from that for discussion. It also gives you a review of where we are in terms of responding to the climate change emergency, and much of this will be covered in my report to Cabinet in December. I know Colin is present. I'm not sure whether Pete Williams, sorry, not Pete Williams.
Phil Williams.
Sorry?
Phil
Williams. No, Phil Williams. I don't think Phil Williams is coming in.
Pete Wiggins, Nigel.
Yeah.
Pete Wiggins, he is here.
He is here. Well, Pete, would you like, I've had those introductory remarks. Is it appropriate now, Chairman, for Pete to say something about the substance of the report, or would that come later?
I think, if you don't mind, I think the format we've agreed is that the proposer of the motion,
yes,
Councillor Kate Haig,
okay,
has the opportunity to speak to the committee, and then we'll ask Peter to present his report, if that's okay. And I will just note at this point for everyone that Councillor Haig proposed the motion. It was seconded by Councillor Rachel Smith, I believe, but she's not available to take part. So over to you, Councillor Haig.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to the committee. Although those of you who recall the debate will recall that this is not where I wanted this report to come to. I was particularly keen that this come to the corporate overview and scrutiny committee, because I believe that the terms of the motion as originally proposed were to look at the work of the whole council and not just in respect to the climate change and environmental agenda. The motion as originally put said that it should include public consultation for their priorities on what building back better in the county looks like. And you know, in a meeting where we had praised the public for their response, especially during the first lockdown, the fact that they're not included in this report, have not been consulted, I think is detrimental. It was also about lessons learned about delivery at pace, and of course we have delivered some of those climate change measures in highways, for example, at pace, and I think there are some lessons we can learn there, but those are not the only changes that were delivered. In fact, the very way in which we are holding this meeting today could be said in local government terms to have been delivered at pace. And it also referred to key strategies, including the council plan. And so, you know, that's not within the remit of this committee. So, I would hope that when you look at this, this report, you don't simply note it, but actually recommend to the cabinet member that this goes back, and that every single portfolio holder looks at their portfolio to see what can be done. The motion was more about strategy and policy than the practical things that are referred to in the report, however welcome they are, and looking at internally at our own practices and our own working practices and policies. And there seems to be some evidence as well that this second lockdown isn't bringing some of the benefits that we saw in the first lockdown in terms of effect on traffic and transport and changes to people's lives in the way that the first one does. And I think, you know, looking at our working practices, we need to consider what we can do. But in terms of strategy and policy, it isn't, you know, it's easy to see that things like introducing cycle paths, encouraging walking, different modes of transport might be one of the things we look at. But actually, how we commission services such as adult social care might be one of the things that we want to look at, so that people aren't travelling vast distances in order to deliver care, but it's delivered professionally by organisations within our communities. And that is what I'd really hope that this motion will be able to do when it was looked at, something far more radical and wider ranging than what's in this report. And I'm not suggesting there's anything wrong with this report in the terms in which it is framed, but I still strongly believe that if we are really serious about meeting the terms of the original motion, then this needs to be far wider than what this report and this committee covers. So I would very much would like members to endorse what's in this report, but also to push back and say that all portfolio holders, all areas of the council must consider how we build climate change and COVID security into everything we do as a council, and not just this particular area of environment. Thank you, Chair. Chair, you're on mute.
I realised the perennial peril of doing things remotely. Sorry, I'll start again. Thank you, Councillor Haigh, for presenting your to the committee. And as I said earlier, we will now move to the officer report that has been provided, and I think that's to be presented by Peter Wiggins. So over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members of the committee, and to Councillor Haigh. I wanted to start off with a personal apology, because I'm the officer responsible for having pulled together the report and was not able to get it to you on time. And I recognise the fact that with the short notice, you won't have had the opportunity to look at this in much detail. So please accept my apologies. This won't happen again. And I will walk you through the report. I just wanted to pick up, just before I do, on a couple of things that Councillor Haigh said that I hope this will give some reassurance on, is that whilst we haven't directly consulted with the public on the contents of the report does draw on very thorough surveys that have been taken place across the county, across the country, and within the county, including Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust. And within the report, I have included a summary of relevance within the key strategies that were referred to in the motion, including the climate change strategy. And it is within the remit of the Gloucestershire Climate Change Strategy for all services across the council to have regard for, and it is within the council's decision-making process as well. And I can, whilst I can't give you any details at the moment, I can reassure you that particularly adult social care are involved in how we are actually taking these forward. It does mention in the report that there is the first annual report on the climate change strategy, and the refreshed action plan is going to Cabinet. It's scheduled to go to Cabinet on the 16th of December, and that report will be published alongside the other papers for the meeting on the 7th of December, and there is more information in that report. So going on to the report, I won't cover the motion, which Councillor Haigh has already done. So firstly, there is a summary chart at Annex 1, and if you do want to jump around, the blue underlined elements in the report are actually active hyperlinks, and I've checked them all. So if you do want to look at any of the references or nip to the annexes and whatever, you should be able to do so. There's a summary in Annex 1 showing the most recent information that we have on the occurrence of COVID-19 cases within the county. And I think just the main thing to draw from that is, in line with many areas, this information shows that cases are still increasing, which is why we're in the middle of a second national lockdown. The first national lockdown covered the period approximately from the end of March to mid-July of this year. And in drawing the findings together for this report, I just wanted to note as well that all the research that is available, whether it be locally, nationally or internationally, has been focused on that initial lockdown. And it's been a little frustrating that we've not been able to draw much in the way of more recent findings, but I wanted to explain why some of the information here may seem somewhat historic, given where we are at the moment and the pace at which things are moving. So what I'm wanting to do then is to go through and just cover by theme in terms of particular items of note from the lockdown and things that have been noted from surveys, etc. So this section 3 looks at what we found out, and then section 4 will look at some work that's been done nationally through the National Environment Research Council on some of the lessons learned and how those things might be taken forward, with conclusions of the report at the end. As you will be aware, in the spring this year, the government lockdown restrictions forced dramatic changes into how people were to move around. And for most people, this would have been the most obvious impact of the crisis. And that led to a significant change in the way that people, whether they were able to work at all and when they were working, how they had to do so, together with things like venturing out for exercises, how they could or not get about and travel, etc. There's an interesting chart at just over the page on figure 1, which again shows travel patterns and behaviours from Google. Again, we haven't been able to pull more recent information on this, but if I am able to do so, then I will make that available. And this just gives a quick summary, as you would expect. So the flat line at the top of the blue block where it says baseline is the, I believe that's February of this year, being the baseline before lockdown. And then the area shaded between that and the blue line basically shows the degree of impact. And as you would expect, there has been a significant decrease in travel for recreation and retail shopping, somewhat decrease in terms of visits to the supermarkets and pharmacies, and particularly with people encouraged to shop online and purchase in bulk to minimise the number of visits. Increased visits, well, low initially when the lockdown first started off, and then increasing as it went forward in terms of people being able to exercise. And the guidance throughout the lockdown period changed as well, which would have impacted the way people travelled. A huge implications for public transport use, given the need of people to isolate and social distance. And similarly, in terms of those who were travelling to their place of work and those at home, which is why the residential has gone up as well. But interestingly, just moving on to 3.4 onwards, while cycling rates during the initial lockdown period doubled nationally, they almost trebled within Gloucestershire within the first pandemic, up to a peak of around 190%. We've seen huge increases in people walking, reduce in car use, which dropped by over 75% to start off with. But as the lockdown started to be lifted within Gloucestershire, nationally and internationally, where lockdowns were lifted, car travel was rapidly returning to pre-lockdown levels. And certainly within Gloucestershire, we're looking at approximately 70% of our pre-COVID car use. A huge increase in working from home. And I thought it was just interesting in terms of the chart here, just to show, I mean, there has been some concern from employees in terms of perceived costs and whatever being passed on to them rather than being borne by us as the employer. But I hope that this gives some reassurance in that, in terms of demonstrating the impact of not carrying out the commute is versus the increase in home emissions. Air quality measures in Stroud dropped to half of their usual level, and that was directly correlated to traffic volumes and has been covered. This is in the health and air quality strategy from the Health Advisory Board and their air quality strategy in terms of the impacts of air quality and the implications for public health. And as I mentioned earlier, the impacts that we've seen in terms of public transport. So we've had some data provided by Stagecoach West showing the huge impacts that patronage on their buses has had as a result. Moving then on to the food and farming sector, we had lots of shortages from panic buying for staple goods at the beginning of lockdown. It doesn't mention loo roll here because it's not food, not for us anyway. But yes, those staple items and food does account for a significant proportion of greenhouse gas emissions globally. And because of the difficulties with major retailers being able to meet the demands, there was seen to be a big increase in purchases through local traders. The local supply chain seemed relatively robust. There was lots of local spending, and that would have had beneficial effects in terms of supporting local business, getting people out to shop locally, and the emissions associated with that as well. And then in terms of health and well-being and access to nature, it's been widely reported in terms of the mental health implications and benefits of having access within a reasonable time period to public open space, and in particular to green space, even having a view of green space if you're not able to go out into it yourself. And the large disparity here in terms of equity of access for households that with low incomes, particularly those of under £10,000 a year, associated with fuel poverty and all the links that that has as well. And those communities are much less likely, significantly less likely, to have access to that quality of open space. So, for example, here it says that 10% of households in Gloucestershire do not have access to a private garden, and that black people are 4 times more likely than people of white ethnicity to have no access to an outdoor space at home. And similarly as well, I think it's been seen that the purview of the natural environment and the access to a green open space and interest in conservation is often the purview of white ethnicity rather than the other ethnic groups. And we, together with the local nature partnership partners, that's one of the things that we will be looking to address in ensuring equitable access to open space. Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust did a survey of supporters, and this showed here, for example, at 3.21 that 47%, sorry, that was the national, 47% of people in England left their house have visited a park or public green space by the end of June. And Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust have carried out a local survey, which is covered more further down in the biodiversity and natural capital section, starting at 3.22. Of course, it's too soon to tell what the environmental impact in terms of the ecosystem and species has been in terms of the lockdown. No doubt early on, with much less visitor pressure and less pollution, it would have been beneficial. But then with people increasingly accessing these areas of public open space, particularly on nature reserves and whatever. There has been huge visitor pressure, which has to be managed carefully, and that will almost certainly have had a negative impact on those environments, and particularly for ones that require active management as well, and where it's much more difficult to do so under the pandemic and the lockdown. So that, in summary, is information for the impacts of the lockdown. And then moving on to Annex 2, this was an ideas series, series of workshops that the National Environmental Research Council undertook. And they sort of had three phases to this. The first being to identify what the issues were and the sort of questions that should be asked. And then going through onto, well, having looked at all of those, what are the sort of solutions that would be appropriate? These were grouped into three main areas: pathogens, greening the build back, and healthy places. I focused on the last two because the first one wasn't within the remit of the motion and the report. All of this information here is included in the annex, but I've just summarised here so that you didn't have to wade through all that information. So there is, in terms of greening the build back, there's a real opportunity to improve sustainability, tackle climate change, and enhance biodiversity at a local level. And that can include things like, at the local level, how do we sequester carbon from the natural environment, remove that and keep it removed out. That nature-based solutions at all levels can determine the resilience of local approaches to sustainability and to climate shocks, impacts and extreme weather, and including the impacts of the pandemic as well. And we are fortunate here in the Gloucestershire Local Nature Partnership to have a very strong and very well regarded local nature partnership in terms of taking these sorts of measures forward. One of the things that the pandemic has done is demonstrated clearly what level of behaviour change can be brought around with the right requirements and incentives. That's probably the clearest linked message in terms of environmental benefits and climate change that could be secured. So it can be done. Not suggesting for a moment that a pandemic is the right way in which to actually do that, especially the bounce back that we're seeing coming out of it. And in fact, one of the points that was in the earlier section as well, which I didn't mention, is that in terms of changing people's behaviour, it's widely accepted that it takes around 6 months to actually lock habits in. And of course, with the early pandemic being only over a 3-month period, whilst some people have continued those benefits, many, particularly those who have been able to return to work as they were encouraged to do so, those habits won't have locked in. The second lockdown might provide some opportunity in terms of doing that, but I think that's an area that we will need to work on, and the climate change strategy recognises the importance of behaviour change as being absolutely fundamental to bringing about the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and that's one of the reasons why we're recruiting at a senior level to be able to develop the strategy to deliver that as well. I briefly touched on 4.5 in terms of gross domestic products, just in terms of local spending. And there's the opportunity here to identify win-wins for the environment and for the economy. There's been lots of information reported in the news recently about the green opportunities, the opportunity for the build back and the jobs that it could lead to, not least in terms of the recent 10-point plan that was announced. And that there is no magic bullet in terms of addressing this. It's going to need to be a blend of a whole range of different situations and solutions, depending on what level we're actually looking at as well, whether that be the individual, the household, community, business, where we work, regionally, nationally, globally. in terms of healthy places and healthy people, the opportunity to use the planning process to support a healthy environment. Our Gloucestershire planning process, there will be more information on this in the report at Cabinet, but this is certainly something that's been looked at and addressed through our local planning process, and there'll be more information on that. There is the local nature partnership itself is about bringing together the economy drivers, the environmental limits, and the health benefits, and how they can all come together to deliver low carbon growth, improving and maintaining people's and well-being, without that being at the expense of the environment, and being able to work to recover from the environmental eco-crisis that we have, the eco-emergency, as well as the climate emergency. Information here on the sorts of successful interventions that might be, the difference between urban and rural, and particularly drawing on air quality here and the impacts, not just from traffic, but within the wider rural community in terms of agriculture as well. We'll be seeing more of this in terms of governance approach to environmental land management schemes, etc., for the agricultural sector as that comes into play, and other benefits payments are reduced going forward through this decade. And of course, as in 4.11, engaging communities is at the heart of developing and delivering just the research agenda, but the whole agenda in terms of changing behaviour, improving people's health and well-being, and reducing emissions. And then linking natural capital, health and well-being in a systematic way, which is what I've just talked about in terms of the local nature partnership as well. And there'll be more information on how council services are taking account of these within the Cabinet report in December as well. So that's a whistle through opportunities for lessons learned. So what I've then just done is I've gone through the key strategies that were referred to in the motion to draw out the main elements, and that was elements, and how they're beneficial, how they relate to the climate change agenda. So the Gloucestershire Vision 2050, developed by Leadership Gloucestershire, of which there was a big conversation held with communities, businesses across the county. The feedback from this influenced the vision and what it actually means in terms of taking this forward, which is put here. And I think all of those elements in terms of a thriving future are relevant for the climate change agenda. So an inclusive county, so the economic and social benefits of growth being felt by all, particularly in addressing inequalities. A magnet county, being a green, pleasant, forward-thinking, successful area in terms of addressing emissions will help with that, particularly with the young. Being innovative, which is definitely required in terms of our approaches. The skills to do so, and we are facing a skills deficit in terms of retrofit for domestic housing, for example. We have lots of opportunities to take forward that through the LAP and the skills providers within the county. And we want to be a prosperous county. We won't be a prosperous county without an economy. We need that to be a low carbon economy to help us do so. And not just prosperous by financially, but prosperous in terms of health and mental well-being and quality of life. Which then takes us to a healthy and safe county. And in terms of being a connected county, that relies on transport and infrastructure. And how we do that in a low carbon way. So I do feel, and that's my summary at the end of 5.3 there, is that a green recovery would very much support bringing this vision about. And in the same way is that this vision is about helping to drive a green recovery too, because when you look at the vision, it does clearly state that sustainability is one of the cross-cutting themes and drivers for the strategy as well. Moving on to the council plan, looking to the future, 2019 to 22, which again was widely consulted on. And this was taking Vision 2050 and essentially, if I can forgive them the summary, but essentially showing how Gloucestershire County Council would help to drive forward and deliver that, how that's relevant to us in terms of our role as a leader with communities and our statutory responsibilities for service delivery. So again, we're looking at an inclusive county, a healthy county, a connected county, a sustainable county, which is very explicit here, and a resilient county in terms of being resilient to extreme weather and the changing impacts of climate as it heats up. And it does particularly touch on challenges and opportunities, of which I've drawn out the climate change one. So we have, and this is what was amended as a result of a council motion to the council plan, that along with councils up and down the country, we declared a climate emergency, and that recognises the irreversible impacts that we are having and have already had on climate change and the need for bold and timely action to be taken. We have a leadership role, along with other public sector bodies, to reduce carbon emissions across the whole county. So again, 5.7, my take on this was that this plan would support a green recovery. Moving on to the industrial strategy produced by the Local Economic Partnership, G1st, LEP. This is still a draft strategy because that's where it is in terms of the process of development and the timeline with government. This identifies Gloucestershire's strengths, opportunities and challenges, and it aligns with the government's national approach in terms of industrial strategy. I've listed out the 5 foundations and grand challenges there. But I'm going to focus on particularly the ambitions that are set in the strategy. And the local industrial strategy is relatively unique in the country in being its ambition to be the greenest place to live and work in England. And wanting for Gloucestershire to be a leader in sustainable growth and to determine how best to protect, maintain and enhance our natural capital assets, putting clean growth at the heart of investment decisions and new developments, building on local green capabilities in the private sector, and for carbon emissions to be reduced to net zero by 2050, with aspirations to go further and faster, which ties in directly to Gloucestershire County Council's emergency declaration and the strategy in terms of we are committed to a net zero for the county by 2050, and working with the public sector as a whole, looking at ways to actually accelerate that, delivering an 80% reduction by 2030. Again, this touches on infrastructure and the need for a fully connected county through innovative transport solutions and digital connectivity, and we've all seen how important that is. Looking at developing a mass transit solution, better cycle links, rail projects, pilot area for innovative technology-driven transport solutions, and looking through the local development frameworks at the district level to increase the supply of housing in the county, and of course directly our strategic role in how we work to actually help to bring about that and deliver the infrastructure for that to happen. And I do strongly feel, I do feel that the industrial strategy would support a green recovery, as I put in 5.17, and the LEP feels that this ambitious strategy will position us as a cyber tech capital of the country that has that digital connectivity and the skills that will be the greenest place to live and work in England. The first place in the world to create a healthy circular economy in food and farming, the most flexible place to work in the UK, a magnet county that attracts and retains young talent, that is inclusive and supportive of all its residents, delivers sustained productivity improvements, and is a great place to live and work. Moving on to the local transport plan, this committee received a presentation on the work that's been undertaken to refresh the local transport plan, including in light of the Gloucestershire climate change strategy and the emergency declaration. It was originally adopted in 2016, and as I said, you received a report on that with Simon Excel at your last meeting. So officers are developing a multimodal transport model to enable and assist district councils in developing their future local plans, and all new schemes are promoting active travel choices from cycling, walking, e-scootering, etc. And there has been public consultation in developing that, as there will need to be ongoing in terms of delivering some of those solutions. And again, at 5.23, this review, which I believe is going to Cabinet in January, will support modal shift and help to retain some of the environmental benefits seen during the coronavirus pandemic. And then moving finally on to the Gloucestershire climate change strategy that was adopted by Cabinet last December. This provides an overarching framework for the county as a whole with a 5-year rolling plan, which commitment has been made to refresh that annually. So by the time that we get to the end of the strategy, we should have the plan in place for taking us forward all the way through to 2030. I've covered 5.26 in terms of the ambitions and the targets. And for the report that's going to Cabinet, that includes progress on achieving the 10 actions by April and the 15 medium and long-term measures as well. It's centred around 8 key themes. So climate change being at the heart of decision-making, buildings at all levels, transport, focusing on low-carbon solutions, power in helping everybody to be able to use renewable energy, waste, continuing efforts to reduce and address waste that's generated, influencing others, getting everybody to do their bit, how we use our land, and campaigning to actually bring about that behaviour change across all these areas at all levels within the county. And I just wanted to add that the buildings theme does have the council's own corporate emissions target as part of that as well. So we as an organisation, linked again to the motion and the strategy, are committed to be net zero by 2030, and for at least 80% of that reduction to be a direct reduction in emissions, and a maximum of 20% of that to be through carbon offsetting. And all of those elements in this strategy are addressed in the Cabinet report that's to come. So in conclusion, at section 6 and in 6.1, I hope you will see that in the summary, the overview that I've given of the key strategies that were referred to in the motion, that the collective intentions in regards to climate change are clear. Our collective response to the initial national lockdown brought about tangible environmental benefits and did indeed demonstrate that rapid collective positive action can be made given the right circumstances. So, and this was supported by evidence on shopping habits, food resilience and transport patterns, and indicating some social readiness for a stronger placemaking, green infrastructure and sustainable travel agenda. So this in turn is linked to the economic growth potential for the county, which itself has the potential to address economic and environmental challenges and open up new sources of low carbon growth through several channels. I have already mentioned 6.4 in terms of the period of time required to lock in behaviour change, which we need to build on. And in 6.5, again, I mentioned that those countries where lockdown has been lifted have rapidly seen a return to pre-COVID levels, particularly in transport. So this means that the real challenge still exists, bringing about lasting significant behaviour change, particularly around transport and personal car use. Transport itself is one of the biggest sources of carbon emissions alongside domestic heat. And we have seen nationally, internationally, and within Gloucestershire resistance over changes to an individual's perceived rights to use their own personal vehicle. So thank you, Chair. I hope that has provided enough information on the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Committee, that concludes the various presentations, if you like. We will move now to open it up for debate and, well, questions and debate and comment. So could I encourage members, please, to use the electronic hand raising function that's available to them, but I will accept all gestures as appropriate. Over to you, committee. I'm looking to see if anybody wants to say anything at this point. I will just say at this point while I'm talking, I see Councillor Orford is now doing the traditional physical indication. And there's always I've noticed with these remote meetings, there's always a time lag. Anyway, thank you, Councillor Orford. Over to you.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Pete, for the presentation. I did a fair bit of late night reading last night, and a few things did spring to my mind. So I'm going to rattle through. I noticed at 3.10 you never mentioned pasta, and I think every supermarket in Gloucester was pretty well out of pasta. But on a serious note, we talk about the local planning process, and then we're talking about retaining our green fields, etc. There's a bit of a conflict there, to put it somewhat mildly. Going on into sustainable things like and transport, still we make no mention or even looked at waterborne transport, for instance, particularly in relation to moving waste. And I've always thought that's something that potentially as a county, with the amount of watercourses we've got, we could certainly look at that. It's that thing about agriculture in particular, certainly those who farm close to the rivers are finding it more and more unsustainable. And there's got to be opportunities, I think, for, should we say, a shift in how they go about earning a living by creating possibly wildlife habitats, nature reserves, etc. I know we've got something going to Cabinet in December, but it's that local planning process. I mean, nearly a year ago, we talked about the amount of houses, for instance, that we could kit out to be more energy efficient. And certainly when you think about it, given the government are going with electric cars, etc., electric charging points, I did want to ask what influence we've had on district planning authorities, because I don't see much of that as yet. I'll leave it there for others, but if somebody could answer those couple of questions, I might come back in.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Orford. As Councillor Orford said, he's raised a couple of questions. Does anybody wish to?
I'm happy to come back on some of that, unless there's anything that Colin wants to say first. No? Okay. So officers across all the local authorities work closely together. We have a carbon neutral network in terms of looking at opportunities to pick these various things up. Certainly, in taking forward, the government bids for example, to the West Cheltenham, and the measures that are looking to be introduced there to limit the impacts of transport and to encourage modal shift. And I'm aware of, for example, that in terms of Cheltenham's approach, they are looking for the cyberpark delivery to be net zero. So there are some high aspirations around in terms of what we're looking to do, and all of the local authorities within the county have declared a climate emergency. So we should be starting to see some of those things be taken on board and move forward. But as we're all aware that the planning process itself is a huge ship in terms of turning around, and is very much prescribed in terms of the process by national government. So we are limited to some extent in what we can do. But officers and members I know are working together to see and ensure that that local planning process helps to contribute to everybody's net zero ambitions. I note your comment in terms of waterborne transport. I'd be surprised if that hadn't come up in terms of the review of the LTP, but I'm more than happy to pass that comment along to colleagues. And in terms of agriculture and farming close to rivers, yes, there are huge pressures on the floodplain and landowners and that sort of thing in terms of the area. The report in October that went to Cabinet on the response to the trees motion, and Cabinet putting the authorities' weight behind the Gloucestershire Tree Strategy through the Gloucestershire Local Nature Partnership. That's looking very much at developing carbon sequestration opportunities. And along the banks of the Severn, there are certainly opportunities in terms of to do that. Wetlands, wetwoods, those sorts of things have huge opportunities for sequestering, locking in carbon, much more so than just tree planting, for example. And our approach to removing carbon from the system will require a whole mix of measures. Tree planting is not sort of the green bullet, so to speak. And then in terms of amount of houses that could be kitted out for EV, etc., we are members of the LEPS Energy Business Group. I sit on that as well as the Net Zero Officer Group. And I know that Western Power, for example, is doing a lot of work in terms of understanding and being able to account for the grid implications of this, as are, for example, Bromford Housing, in making sure that their staff have access to EV charging, working with us to look at joint opportunities, and for those to be available for the community as well. And when we're looking at households that have EV charging and solar panels and battery storage, then there's a whole vehicle to grid and opportunities for the car to act as a battery store itself and helping to reduce the pressures on the grid. So thank you for raising those issues. They are very much alive and in mind, and are being accounted for in terms of going forward.
Thank you for your responses there, Peter. Councillor Orford, do you want to come back, or are you?
I didn't want to hog the thing, Chair, certainly.
That's not. At the moment, I have nobody else raising an electronic hand, and I've had no physical gestures. So.
It's just if Pete could go a stage further. I did ask the question about individual planning authorities and what we talked about 12 months ago. I don't see anything yet in the industry picking up on the creation of, should we say, homes that it's not just the solar panel argument, it's the ground source heat pumps. We always said we could impact, never mind on just on council buildings, but we could impact on all of the development industry. And at the moment, I don't see that happening. And I wonder what incentives as a county council we could put out there to encourage developers to build homes that are more sustainable when it comes to climate change and using the power sources that nature has given us. Just a thought. Having had solar panels just recently installed on my own roof, for instance.
Should you have declared interest on this? Carry on.
Thank you. You're right, and apologies, I didn't cover that in great detail. But I did mention the constraints put on us in terms of the national planning policy framework, and so we are very limited in terms of, or districts, sorry, with the local planning authority are limited in the level of ambition that they can secure, and the various local plans, without mentioning any of them in particular, have different approaches and levels of ambitions and levels of challenge that they bring to bear on the national planning policy framework. And the more challenged you are, the greater the risk of appeal and having them thrown out by the inspector, and actually having other measures forced on them in terms of limits that can be built to. I'm not a planner. I know that particularly Nigel has a lot of experience in this area, but we are, working to help to influence the sector, and there have been recent government announcements in terms of helping existing households to make a difference. And whilst new households are very important, I think if we're not able to bring them necessarily to the standard we would like, I think it's important, and this is one of the issues that the LEP has picked up on, that they are flexible enough to be able to be readily retrofitted in the future. So the current standards are much higher than most domestic housing has been built to, given the numbers that there are out there. So the biggest challenge is to address the existing housing stock, which is, I think, why government have focused their announcements in terms of the funding for that, and a lot of that will require encouraging those who are able to pay to make those changes. And we're looking with 7Y Energy Agency and the districts, and through the Warm and Well initiative as well, in helping those in fuel poverty and residential social landlords be able to help them to make those changes as well. So I apologise, it's not an ideal response. I can't give you an ideal response, but that is how we are looking to take that forward.
Again, thank you, Peter. I'll go back then to Councillor Orford to see if this line of discussion has come to an end or not.
Like I said, I certainly didn't want to hijack the meeting, and you know me, Robert, I could talk for England when it comes to generation power from rivers, rising fall pontoons. There's so much out there that could be explored, and in fairness to government, I wouldn't want people thinking governments aren't looking at it. I mean, we know we've got this ambition for all of us going to be driving electric cars, for instance. I don't know we're going to do that without all the charging infrastructure, but the aspiration is there, and I think you've got to applaud government for probably trying to tackle these things. But I'll leave it at that for now, and then there will be others, I'm sure, that would want to make some sort of comment. But I'd certainly want to explore further with the cabinet member. We're doing a bit of work anyway around work with the EA in relation to tree planting, what could be created, wildlife habitat, particularly in floodplains. So there's plenty out there that keeps me busy, but I don't want to bore the committee with all of that. Thank you.
I can assure you, Councillor Orford, we are most certainly not bored. And actually, your insights into those particular subjects are always excellent. As it happens, I do have a couple of people now indicating, and I'm not quite sure. When I made my earlier comments, it might have been that they had actually raised their hands, but I couldn't see them on my screen. But anyway, first up is Councillor Cromwell, and I have Councillor Patel. Councillor Cromwell, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a quick question, really, to the officers. We're getting a bit of noise about the local electricity bill, potentially that might go through Parliament or whatever. Is that a day late and a dollar short now, with all the announcements that we've now had about, obviously, the electricity companies producing green energy, about us all, the solar panels that we're all now going to be encouraged to do. Is this local electricity now sort of almost in the past now, because it's been very quickly usurped by all of the other things that are going along, or is there still some mileage in it? I don't know. I mean, I just, I've been asked a couple of questions about it, and I just wondered what the answers were, really.
Well, Chair, thank you, Councillor Cromwell. I'm not hugely familiar in terms of the contents of the local electricity bill. However, I know the importance of the local infrastructure in terms of our local resilience and the impacts that there might be in terms of the national infrastructure and power availability. Getting that down to the individual household level, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of sort of smart vehicle to grid charging and being able to in terms of with smart meters and all that sort of thing, of electricity companies being able to ensure that people are using their battery stores and smoothing down the peaks of demand, and in terms of linking into the encouragement of local energy generation as well. So I think in terms of all of this, whether it be the supply companies, the infrastructure operators, that the level of investment that would be required nationally, I think that there needs to be that level of investment locally to ensure and help to bring about that local electricity generation, if as much as anything to ensure that people are able to benefit from when there's a glut of renewable energy generation and not suffer when there is not.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you want to come back, Councillor?
Yeah, I mean, I think basically what some of the comments that I'm getting is, obviously, if Mrs. Smith up the road wants to generate electricity and she wants to sell it to me down the road, it's about that. And I'm as you've just said, with the infrastructure, I can't quite understand how that would necessarily work, because who then maintains the network? How do you know that the electricity you're actually taking into your house is generated from that electricity? There's a lot of questions about it, and I just wondered if that's what I'm trying to say. Really, is that something that, to be honest with you, is something that is now been superseded by all of the other work that we're now doing?
Sorry, thank you. And no, I don't think it is. And I think one of the reasons for that is as we have with other utilities, the infrastructure is in place to deliver the service, and then that infrastructure is available for any provider to deliver through. So I think this is then about making it easier for those who do, community energy generation locally to be able to provide that. So there's a technical term for that, which is called sleeving. And that's about making sure that having a contractual relationship that shows that where the energy is generated is matched to the consumption, and having a contractual arrangement in place to deliver that. And that's one of the things that we're exploring, for example, in terms of our own energy supply, in terms of how we can directly bring that about. So that's just doing that same sort of thing at the local level. So I think in the same way, water, broadband, gas, all of those sorts of things, is that you will then be able as a consumer to decide who you actually want to purchase it from.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Cromwell? Councillor Cromwell, do you want to come back?
Thank you.
Next up, I did have Councillor Patel, who did have an electronic hand up, but now doesn't seem to. But so anyway, over to you, Councillor Patel.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a couple of points from the report. Thanks for the report, Pete. Very useful information here. The first question I have is with regards to the data within Graph 1, or Figure 1, should I say? Just wondering, how long did it take before that data was available for viewing? Because that data was only goes back up to May? So that was, more than 6 months ago. So I just wondered what would have been really good is if the data is quite, if you were able to collect the data quite quickly, if we had a sort of a 3-month stage data analysis, 6-month stage data analysis, 9-month, so we can actually see what the pattern of change in behaviours are during those sort of 9-month lockdown period or in between. So that was the first question. Also wanted to mention, you mentioned something about working from home and the benefits of that in terms of the environmental benefits as a result of not having to commute into work. How can you measure, how do we measure the carbon footprint of individuals who commute to work, whether it's via public transport or whether it's by cars, in comparison with working from home? I mean, during the first lockdown, there were, the great benefits of the carbon footprint was it was summertime, the weather was warm. Now we move into winter. People are obviously who are working from home are using more electric, are using more gas energy. So does the benefits of commuting to work, working from home, is more beneficial than going into work? Because in an office environment, you have one heater, all lights all connected up, whereas if you have 300 people working individually from home, then they're going to be consuming more energy, vastly more energy, especially during the colder weather or colder climate. That was another point. And then 3.8 refers to 3.8.
Air quality.
Air quality, that's right. And there's a statement there which states that nationally there are 40,000 annual avoidable deaths from air pollution. Just wondering where that 40,000 figure comes from, and in what context? Is that the 40,000 deaths avoided as a result of improved air quality in the 3 months during lockdown, or is this a more general statement there? And 3.17 refers to, in England, black people are 4 times more likely than people of white ethnicity to have no access to an outdoor space at home. I'm just wondering whether that's just black people or whether that's anyone who's categorized within the BAME group. Just wondered if that was referred to incorrectly, or whether that is referring to Afro-Caribbean people. So just a bit of clarity on that. And finally, the government announcement last week on banning sales of new petrol and diesel cars from 2030. Obviously, will be a big boost on carbon footprint, and also our targets of net zero by 2050. Just wondering what your thoughts were on that, and also the impact that will then have on people from people who are not as affluent, who would then be to be able to afford electric vehicles or other modes of transport. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patel. I'll do my best to address those in turn. So the data in Figure 1, yes, and as I mentioned earlier, we hadn't been able to update this, and I think that might be my technical abilities rather than just the report itself. And I'm happy, Chair, to undertake to look to refresh that and perhaps include that in future directors' reports in terms of how this might be changing, certainly within the next report, if that's helpful. Moving on then, in terms of the working from home and environmental benefits, I just want to refer members back to figure 2, which is just underneath 3.7 on working from home. And I appreciate it's blurred and I can just about make out the wording here, but you've got on the far left-hand side, the axes talks, that's the bottom bar is about the summer and the top bar is about the winter. And if you look at the blue, the light blue, they are to do with personal transport and the changes in that. And then on the right-hand side, which is the dark blue onwards, the dark blue in particular is about residential fossil fuel emissions. So I think what this is trying to, and I think clearly demonstrates that whilst there is, yes, a significant increase in fossil fuel use within the winter period, and sorry, this is across the European Union as a whole, that is dwarfed by the fossil fuel use that's done for transport. So if you were to remove the transport side and perhaps, I don't know, double, treble those emissions from heating and whatever on the residential side, they still don't come to near what the difference would be. Obviously,
Pete, just come in a second. Pete, sorry, I think a really great example of that is obviously, as you know, we now sell electricity as well. And during the summer, our electricity prices after lockdown dropped through the floor. They went down to literally £20 per megawatt hour, and in some places it was almost at zero. So it gives you some idea that after lockdown, just how little electricity was actually being used. Granted, that was the summer, so you've got a different situation in the winter. But it does start to give you some. I actually started from a perspective. I thought that I wonder whether one offsets the other, but I'm pretty well convinced now that you do get energy efficiency by people working from home.
And I think there is a challenge to us as well, particularly on our own staff, in getting that message across in a way so they're not feeling done to in terms of that, and that we also don't get accused of externalising our own emissions as well. What Councillor Patel also asked about was how we actually measure the carbon footprint in terms of commuting to work. We, in terms of our public reporting at the moment, do not. That is what will be classed as a Scope 3 emission, which is outside the scope of our strategy. It doesn't mean, though, that we're not trying to be able to do so. We had about a year ago now, we had a staff travel survey, and with anonymously identifying people's households' postcodes and where they were travelling from. And I think this is from memory, so I'm not trust these are exactly right, but it'd be broadly right, that something like 70 to 80% of employees live within 5 miles of work, which is eminently walkable or cyclable or use public transport too. So there is a huge opportunity for us to actually work with staff to actually change the way that they get to work. And in terms of the pool car scheme, that we have going as well, that takes away the need for people to actually, those who have infrequent use of vehicles, the need to actually have their own personal vehicle at work to be able to access during the day to carry out their job. And for those services where they require frequent, regular access, we've been working with them to make individual vehicles specific to their service available to do so as well. And within EE&I, we've done specific trials on that within Highways Development Management. And there's another service that Streetworks inspections as well, where we've been trialling the use of a pool car, and that's been very, very successful. So there's a lot to be done here, and we will need to do a repeat of that staff travel survey, and it'd be interesting to see how people's habits may have changed through the lockdown. But certainly the pandemic has made a seismic shift in an acceleration in us being able to use technology and people being able to work from home and being able to see the capabilities of it, albeit there have been some limitations as well. Moving on then to 3.8 in terms of air quality, where does that information come from? It's referenced at the bottom but that figure is repeated in the Health and Wellbeing Advisory Board's air quality and health strategy, and that is a generally accepted national figure of the health impacts of air quality. So that's not specifically lockdown related, but it does go to show that given the differences, you know, for 50% in Stroud in April in terms of halving the NOx emissions, and then the impact that that would have in terms of excess deaths from air quality, life expectancy, asthma and educational attainment, for example. In terms of the reference to black ethnicity, that is specifically meant, my understanding is that is correctly referenced in terms of black ethnicity as opposed to BAME, so it is specifically referring to that ethnic group. And I was very careful to ensure that we were using appropriate wording in terms of who we were referring to and how we were referring to them in there as well. And then moving onward to the government's announcement for the ban of internal combustion engine sales by 2030 for cars and vans. Yes, that will provide a big boost. And we are expecting that to, and we don't understand the scale of that yet, but in terms of accelerating, no pun intended, our emissions reduction from transport. And the impact of those who are not as influent being able to afford. Well, I think there are a couple of things here is that we've seen the price of electric vehicles drop as they become more widely available and the technology has improved. And there's going to be a massive climb in their provision. So I would expect to see the cost of those plummet to the same sort of prices that people will be paying for brand new vehicles at the moment. There will almost certainly be some sort of government subsidy to help tide people over to that. Some sort of scrappage scheme I would expect to see in terms of enabling that. And of course, following on from that, there will of course be, as we already have a second-hand car market in terms of electric vehicles, which is extremely buoyant. It's quite hard to get hold of a second-hand vehicle before they're sold. And of course, as the use of brand new vehicles increases, so will the availability of cheaper second-hand vehicles as well. So I think in the long term, that will, or in the, sorry, not the long term, the short to medium term, I think that will quite quickly, by the end of the decade, have worked itself through. But yes, they are out of the price reach of many households at the moment. I think, Councillor Patel, I've answered all the points you raised.
Councillor Patel, I think that was an invitation for you to come.
Yes, I was just finding the unmute button. Thank you very much for answering the questions, Pete. Just going back to 3.17, it wasn't just regarding the ethnicity or who have no access to an outdoor space at home. It wasn't just merely the term black, but I wanted to actually find out whether it was actually other groups within the BAME community as well, such as Asians. But it sounds like it's not. It's just specifically targeting that ethnic group. And 3.16 mentioned 10% of households in Gloucestershire have no access to private garden. And then 3.17 refers to, states that in England, black people are 4 times more likely than white people not to have access to outdoor space. Do we know what that figure would be in Gloucestershire?
I don't, I'm afraid.
Okay.
But I don't have the figures to hand, but I expect that it would be black people, the figure relating to black people that was most stark to highlight here. But I have no doubt that other ethnic groups have similarly less likely to have access if they are more likely to be in less affluent households. So I would, that's being reflected in general, and I think in 3.16 in terms of 10% of households in Gloucestershire not having access. I think it's just trying to draw some sort of link between those to demonstrate that, but I don't have access to those figures for Gloucestershire at the moment, but it may well be something that came out in the survey by Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust. But I'm given the much lower levels of engagement in the agenda and people taking part in such surveys being quite self-selecting, I'm not sure that we would get any further information from that, but I'm happy to ask.
Councillor Patel. Thank you. Looking at my screen, I think that Councillor Orford has come back on to make a contribution. Is that right?
Chair, Councillor Hurst has had his hand up for quite a while. I'm not sure if you can see it or not.
Well, that's very interesting. No, I can't. This happened earlier with Councillor Cromwell, who actually sent me a text message to say, and I didn't have his hand on my screen. So clearly the technical aspects to this are not working effectively. So as always, I will revert to physical gestures as appropriate. But thank you for that. So if you wouldn't mind, Councillor Orford, I will go first to Councillor Hurst.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Councillor Hurst.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a bit surprised that the report didn't include the huge steps which the County Council has made already towards climate change. And I'll give you 5 examples. Javelin Park, where we've stopped having to fill earth holes with rubbish. That's now burnt in a very clean way. Shire Hall, another not a cheap project, where the whole footprint of Shire Hall has been reduced and the amount of energy-saving devices around the building are countless. New cycle tracks throughout the county. A net zero statement by 2050. And plans for the county to become the cyber leaders of the UK. I really am disappointed that these positive moves aren't mentioned in the report. We are a sustainable county, and we have to remember we are also a diverse county. Although we have an urban spine, Gloucester, Cheltenham and Tewkesbury, to the east and to the west of that urban spine, there are areas of huge amounts of rural countryside. Some would say already green areas. How do we tackle this dual-hatted county?
Thank you, Councillor Hurst. I don't know if Peter wants to address that or other officers.
I have some comments to make, if that's okay, Chair.
Yep, please.
Councillor Hurst is right. I haven't made a great deal of detail in terms of specifics that we've done for a couple of reasons. I have included our aspirations as a county and as an organisation in terms of our carbon reduction, and I included, I believe, if I haven't, apologies, and I'll mention it now, our most recent publicly available performance, which was the end of 2018-19, where we had achieved a 70% reduction on our 2006-7 baseline. One of the reasons for not including too much detail on that here is that there is a report which is working its way through the approval process at the moment to go to Cabinet in December. That includes an update on progress with the action plan, which will pick up on all of the points that Councillor Hurst has raised. Not all of that information is in the public domain yet, and I didn't want to put that in the public domain through this report prematurely when that's not had the been through the governance process that's in place to do so. So I understand and acknowledge some of Councillor Hurst's frustrations, and I apologise, but that's why. But those are definitely addressed in that report. And in particular, in terms of talking about cyber leaders of the UK, and that particularly is mentioned in terms of the local industrial strategy and working to take that forward, as is in terms of us being a diverse county and the challenges that we face in terms of rurality. And there was an announcement earlier in the year when the leader and the cabinet member signed the organisation up to UK 100's county climate network, and that was specifically in recognition and a coming together of authorities that have that are particularly rural and have those various challenges in the same way that we do. UK 100 is a coming together of leading authorities up and down the country, local authorities, to look to address these, and having declared an environmental emergency, how we can engage with governments and other national partners to actually take that forward.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for those explanations. Councillor Hurst, do you want to come back? You're on mute, Councillor Hurst.
No, thank you, Chair, not at this moment. Okay,
thank you. In which case, I will now come back to Councillor Orford. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and I'm glad now that Stephen went in front of me, because very, very much what I thought about what was missing in the report, and I hope, because Councillor Egg is probably patiently listening to all this, thinking, well, what's that to do with the motion? Well, I hope she takes the confidence from the things that Stephen's highlighted, and certainly what Peter said at the start, as to influence in, if you like, all the directorates. Just a final one from me, if no one else has indicated. I'm looking to Nigel, because whilst Peter answered my question in relation to the local planning process, it was obvious that we still run a bit scared of developers and appeals. And I wonder if Nigel, with his expertise in planning, could say how we as a county can perhaps influence that and local authorities, because it is a government initiative to build a better standard of home, and how can we possibly influence that if we are always running away from a developer who potentially might take us to appeal because he doesn't want to build that sort of housing?
A good question. One of the last projects I did before retiring from planning consultancy was a headquarters building in Wellbeing in Oxfordshire, which I went to see recently, which has just been completed. It got a BREEAM Excellence. That was really the ambition. That was the ambition of the occupier, to do that. It didn't have to do that because, as you say, the planning requirements were less onerous. Government has indicated it wants us to move towards zero carbon housing by 2025. One of the difficulties, I think, is where we sit in all this, Phil. We could try and put it in our developer guide, which, as you know, we're currently reviewing, and I'm bringing that to Cabinet in January. And what I'll do is talk to Simon Excel about this, Phil, to see what we as a county can do in terms of getting a policy, an adopted policy. As you know, there could be kickback, as you've hinted at, but I'm more than happy to discuss with Simon where we can give that leadership role by using our developer guide in terms of these policies.
Thanks, Nigel. Thanks, Chair. Nothing more from me, Rob.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Orford. Thank you, Councillor Moore. Now, at the moment, I can't see any new contributors. So I was just about to ask Sophie, who seems to have a better handle electronically on who's indicating than I do. I see you shake your head there, Sophie. Is that correct? There's nobody else indicating at the moment. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, Chair.
Okay. In which case, it looks as though, as far as questions, comment, debate is concerned, members are satisfied. And I'm just talking slowly just to give anybody else who wants to make a contribution at this point any opportunity to come in. Does anybody, before we sum up as to where we're at, does anybody want to add anything else? It doesn't look like it to me. Sophie, is that okay? I think that's right. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. So obviously, thank you to Peter in particular and officers for doing this work in response to the motion that was referred to us. And I know the comments from the proposer at the start, but the fact is the motion was referred to this committee, and we need to deal with it within the remit of what we are responsible for as a committee. If I could just make my own comments here as to, there's some, I think, an excellent. There's some, don't know what. I just heard some interference there, but anyway, I shall carry on. I think, if we go through this report, there's an excellent summary here of all the things that this county council is doing in this field, and I think it demonstrates how we as an authority really are taking an absolute leadership role in so many areas, which is fantastic. And I think it's interesting that comments have been made, references have been made to various announcements, and this whole interaction between central government and local government is a bit of a sort of push me pull you kind of thing. And there were some very interesting announcements by national government last week, which I think may well help us locally to develop our strategies. Some very interesting things about, for example, local, small-scale local nuclear energy, about wind power, and obviously, we've got we've set out our agenda on helping and facilitating the move to electric vehicles, in particular with things like charging points and all that sort of stuff. That really does give us some of the great announcements last week by the government, give us some locally a real boost in many ways to develop our existing strategies, and which are very much, ongoing, as I appreciate. And I think there's a reference, wasn't there just now, to a paper coming to Cabinet, which demonstrates this is very much ongoing, and we are very much at the forefront. So I think, what I'm going to say is that, as far as the motion is concerned and what we've been asked to do as a committee, we've had an excellent report, and I think it's our job now as a committee to recommend it to the Cabinet member in his work in developing our various strategies to successfully carry on as a leadership authority, and in developing our policies accordingly. And to continue that excellent work. So that's what I suggest we say as a committee. There is one particular point I want to make about the conclusion section, and in particular the very final paragraph, 6.6. And I think that reflecting the comments of the committee and indeed, well, and all the things that we've discussed, and indeed what I've just said about taking a leadership role and where we're at, I propose that we actually replace the wording of 6.6 with the following, and I shall read it out. So, and just so that members are aware, this won't come as a surprise to the cabinet member. So, you know, this is really to build on the work of officers and the cabinet member, this is considered. This is to do that. So the challenge of bringing about a I'll say the wording would be 6.6. The challenge of bringing about a fundamental change in transport powered by renewable sources remains, full stop. Gloucestershire County Council has a leadership role in bringing this about, and as a first step will be publishing its electric vehicle strategy very shortly. So I propose that is the wording for paragraph 6.6, and if I could have somebody to second that, I'd be very grateful. And I see a hand there from Councillor Caldwell. So I'll take that, Councillor Caldwell. Thank you. Okay, so as I said, we recommend this report to the cabinet member with that amendment. And I think indeed earlier on, Peter mentioned some technical amendments as well to the data, etc. Are we content, committee, to it? If anybody is not, please indicate. It doesn't look at the moment as though I have anybody saying anything else. So thank you. Thank you very much. So obviously, thank you to members. Thank you very much to, in particular, the officers. And you know, I appreciate, you know, you made apologies as to why we had this report late, but obviously the explanation was in many ways, you know, about us having the opportunity to do some additional work on something that would be of great benefit in this field was was a very valid one, and we fully understand that. So thank you to all concerned. Okay, we shall now move on then to the next item, which takes us to item 5, the Executive Director's Report, pages 35 to 48. Over to you, Colin.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. As in previous meetings, the last couple of meetings, I haven't got my full team with me because it's probably better and more efficient to let them get on with their everyday stuff, and I'll field everything I can. If we can't, we'll get back to you at the end. I'll try and do my best anyway at the end. They've probably been spoken to enough this morning, so I'll try and keep this short and sharp and whiz through and just pick out some key highlights as I go through the report. COVID-19, obviously going back into lockdown again, is having a slight effect, or quite a bit of an effect. And our main key issue here is really to ensure that we protect our staff, particularly the frontline staff during the winter, to make sure we can provide those frontline services such as gritting, etc., which is going to be the real challenge if it was to start to creep out into the larger population at any level, and the way it will be passed on between crews. M5 Junction 10, a great result on the 14th of October, or 16th of October actually. We signed the GDA, which means we've secured basically £250 million for the building of Junction 10. And went straight into consultation, didn't want to lose a moment, and that finishes tomorrow, I believe. Yes, tomorrow. And the Cabinet approved the use of the CPO for land acquisition should it be required in moving the scheme forward. Hires contracts are running relatively smoothly, having had a little bit of friction in the first lockdown. We now sort of recovered that situation, and for the most part, the services are actually kept to a reasonably good level without that much impact. And our Skills Academy has been really successful. I think we will shortly be raising the number of apprentices that we're employing up to 20. Highway delivery, as I already mentioned, the winter readiness is obviously a key factor for us, and trying to make sure that we're as resilient as possible with the possible impacts of COVID coming. Emergency Active Travel Fund, we put an ambitious bid in for 10.5 million. Unfortunately, the Department for Transport weren't as equally ambitious, so we end up with £860,000, which we'll put into the B4603 scheme. The aim is really to try and build that pot up. I've now managed to get Highways England to agree to the £6.3 million, providing we provide the remainder of the leverage needed. It's up to £11 million needed. My aim is still to have that scheme in substantially in anyway by the end of next year, if at all possible. A419 improvements are now complete. Canal bridges is an interesting one, because obviously going along with that canal bridge work and the additional funding that's now secured, that will enable the towpath that we put in right the way through from the other side of Stroud right across to Saul Junction, to join up with the Gloucester Sharpness Canal. That will actually enable, showing how this actually starts to connect up, that will enable us to put a cycle route along there, which is planned right along that new canal to Saul Junction, where it will join with the cycle route that's going in on the Sharpness to Gloucester. Most of it is already in now. And then that, with a small link through the centre of Gloucester, will then join up to the B4063, which I've just mentioned, which will then give us a strategic backbone of our cycle route right the way from the train station at Cheltenham, right the way through past Cyber Park and GCHQ, through to Gloucester, the railway station, the hospital, the university and the halls of residence in the area, linking those two together. And then all the way through where it can actually come off in Gloucester to where we'll link into Gloucester, rather, to go down and then along the canal to Saul Junction and on to Stroud. So you can see how that backbone of high quality cycle route is now starting to develop. ICU public and school transport has been incredibly difficult over the last 3 months, not least was bringing the service back online. If anyone ever told me it was difficult, it was going to be difficult closing services down in COVID, the hardest job of all is to bring them back online in a safe way. And that was a real challenge in September when, to be honest, the government guidance from DfT was too little too late. And we had to almost take the initiative and drive the decisions ourselves to bring those services back online in the safest possible way we could to ensure children can get to school. E-scooters are proving very successful and very well used. The company are very, very happy with the usage that's getting, particularly, well, both in Gloucester and Cheltenham. School Streets, the travel team has been launching the School Streets project in, I think it's 2 of the streets at the moment. Just to note, really, Pavements Motion 787 in the report, the figures originally reported to the Highways Advisory Group and then to Scrutiny Committee did not include either minor works carried out from depots or works which were part of major projects, which we didn't realise till afterwards. When you add those in, if you look at the table, you can see what that actually does. It's quite substantial. So, so for 2018-19, we said there'd been 725k spent on footway maintenance. In fact, in addition to that, there's 2.7 million spent on new footways and major construction. In 2019-20, again 778. Which then had another 2.79 million of new footways from major projects and minor works. And then 2021, i.e. this year, footway maintenance was increased dramatically to 2.8 million. And then this year, we've actually put 4.43 million into new footway work. So again, you can see this year alone, it's over £7 million has been spent on footway work. So I know there's always a point of concern We probably didn't do ourselves justice in that original report. Strategic infrastructure. M5 Junction 9. Well, there's some. Well, it should be going out to consultation in January. At the moment, we're negotiating with DFT. DFT have registered concerns about us going out on our options because Highways England aren't completely happy with one of those options, and it's something we need to manage over the next couple of weeks before we could decide whether we go forward or not with the consultation. There's no point in going out to consultation only to find Highways England object, because that would just stop it dead in its tracks. However, the issue is that what the funding we're chasing here is what's called local large major scheme funding, which we managed ourselves by hook and by crook to get ourselves onto that programme. And we've been busy trying to chase and catch up with what the programme should be. And by the end of next year, we would have been on target to deliver that, and therefore would have been right at the front line. And we've been doing things like our strategic outline business cases even before they were needed, and submitting before the deadlines, so to make sure we stayed ahead of the game. If we have to put back the consultation, that will impact our ability to fund to bid for the for the large local major scheme funding. So it's something we really need to give serious thought to, and also obviously take advice from DFT, who have advised at the moment that without Highways England backing, we shouldn't be going out. Improved rail connectivity. Since this was written, we've heard that there is even more rail improvements. We have now secured the Metro West service. Will be starting. We'd hoped it was going to be brought forward. Network Rail told us 6 weeks ago it'll be starting in May next year. It won't be May, it will be December now. I think a lot of this is about COVID, because a lot of the rail timetabling and improvements have slipped due to COVID. But it's going to go back to December, but it'll be next year now, rather than as originally thought was 2022. And that will give us a 30-minute service to the centre of Gloucester from Birmingham, and all stopping service. And at the same time, which is really good news that we were being fighting for some time, it'll also mean that Ashchurch will, for the first time, an hourly service rather than its current 2-hourly service, with a new train service going from Bristol to Worcester, which will interface with existing service. So therefore, at the moment, it's 2 hours. It will give us a 1-hourly service in future. A417 missing link. Preferred announcement, a route announcement was in March 2019. As you probably are aware, earlier this year, just at a critical point, National Trust objected to the proposals, which has meant that it's probably lost about 8 to 12 months on the timetable. So the scheme slipped by 8 to 12 months. At the moment, Highways England are working up on a revised scheme, which will go out to consult on in the new year, which hopefully takes account of the National Trust objections. Really great news on Clantony Road, the Gloucestershire Southwestern bypass. We did work really hard to finally secure a virtual CPO public inquiry, which starts today. But a major objector, I got a letter yesterday, removed their objection. It's always run up to the wire. Removed their objection. Bikini Bathrooms removed their objection from the scheme yesterday. So we're left with just 2 smaller objections now to deal with at the CPO inquiry starting today. OTP will be going to Cabinet in December and on to Council in January. Sorry, no, I'm wrong in that. Sorry, it'll be going to Cabinet in January, I think, and then on to Council. It's delayed so we could take account of the DFT guidance was supposed to come out this month. I still haven't seen it yet, on decarbonising transport, so we could take account of anything they should say. We believe, because it was an early document, we believe we've written the OTP to take account of it anyway, but we want to make sure before we publish it. On libraries, again, on 5th of November, they were closed as a result of the second lockdown, but that we are providing an ongoing click and collect service from the libraries, or reserve and collect, I should say. Registration, again, all weddings and civil partnerships have been suspended, but we are trying to keep up to date this time, from the 5th of November, that is. We're still trying to keep up to date this time with our birth appointments, which really slipped in the first lockdown, and we ended up with about 2,500 backlog. So try and stay as close, as much as we can on top of those at the moment by doing face-to-face birth appointments, and obviously register of deaths as well. Waste management, we're now obviously into winter hours from the 25th of October, and we've been keeping the appointments in place. There's a table that shows you what the current waiting time is, which isn't too bad. And a survey we carried out with the public was actually very supportive of the 80 to 90% satisfaction level of the booking system, with a very high, about 60-70% of people saying they wished it to be kept after lockdown. So quite a positive piece of feedback on that. Employment skills, just to touch on this, not immediately responsibility. This group obviously does feed from obviously the COVID, that where we're doing as many of the courses as we can, running them virtually, and only where we really have to run the courses from adult education centre and face-to-face, we're doing so. They're often where people, for example, basic skills on IT, which are really important during the lockdown, because some people haven't got access to a computer or even have the ability to know how to book a doctor's appointment or book food appointments and that sort of thing using computers. So we're actually providing services of that type. Apologies. So we're providing services of that type, still face-to-face actually at the centre, but the rest is all, most of everything else, about 90% is all being done online. And I think that is it. The only other thing that I'd like to just draw your attention to, and I think it's a credit to E&I as a whole, there is the Environmental Scrutiny Scorecard at the end of the report. And if you look, every single item has been achieved, has got a green star, which, given the pressure on the department and how stretched we are to achieve that during lockdown, I think says something about the way staff are being so committed to making sure we carry on driving the best services we can during a very difficult period. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Colin, for that, and a very telling comment at the end there indeed. So over to committee members. Now, at the moment, looking at my screen, I have electronic hands from Councillors Orford and Cromwell, but I'm not sure if those are from the previous item or if they're coming into the... So, Councillor Orford, you were waving at me, so that looks like you want to speak. Over to you.
It was a mistake on my part leaving my hand up, but since you picked up on me, I will pick up on one thing. I'll sound like a dog with a bone this morning. Colin mentioned the great work that's gone on around canal restoration. Have we looked at all about the possibilities in the future of possibly moving waste by water? We could get the Forest of Dean across the River Severn, for instance, and the canal network, certainly the Stroud work. It's not pie in the sky. It is a serious proposition that I really would like to have a look at, because the amount of waste we move by road, you could move a fair bit by water if the will was there to do it.
I think it's a difficult one. The cost would certainly go up quite dramatically, and you've got one hell of a lot of double or triple handling to take because you're going to have to take the waste to the canal or the river. You put it in the barge. I mean, particularly with the Severn, it's almost like going across it, and then almost straight away you have to take it back out and put it into trucks. To be honest, with the double handling and everything else, I don't think you're probably going to gain much environmentally. Yeah, it's something we could certainly look at. But I mean, where waste and that sort of thing. I mean, certainly when I worked in London, a phenomenal amount of our waste was we used the Thames to transfer the waste down the Thames to Pitsea and other tips and places like that. But I think it's a bit more difficult in an area. I mean, what we do is most of our stuff now is designed to be delivered or collected or bulked up in the local area to which it actually is collected. So we do minimise that. It's not lots and lots of refuse trucks going backwards and forwards. So we do bulk up wherever we can, and a lot of the other waste, the non sort of recycling waste and that sort of stuff is often managed and dealt with in the local areas, and particularly where it comes to the green waste. Well, I think we could look at, but I don't think there'll be, I'll be honest with you, I don't think there'll be, even with the amount of water we've got in the county and the canals opening, I think it would be logistically difficult, and I would be interested to see how much of if it did actually reduce the carbon footprint, but certainly something we can look at.
Councillor Orford, do you wish to come back?
That's fine. It had crossed my mind about the handling. I can quite see where Colin's coming from. It's just something that I've always thought was a possibility.
Okay. Councillor Cromwell, were you looking to come in here?
Yes, I was. Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you. I haven't got it completely wrong then.
No. You do get something right. Very quickly, Colin. It's a shame we didn't get the money, or all the money that we wanted for the cycleways. My question is, how now are you going to divvy the money that we did get up? Because are we now going to make sure we deliver all of the smaller schemes that were on the programme and keep it for the big, or keep the money for the big scheme and the smaller schemes suffer? Which way round? Because obviously, when you've not got enough, you've got to find a way of divvying it up, haven't you?
Thanks, Kevin. I mean, as I've already said, the level of leverage we've got on the B4603 is so great. We don't want to use that leverage. I mean, I've got 6.3 million in the pot. If I can build the pot up to 11, so at this moment in time, it's let's be honest. At times like this, you have to make hard decisions, and it's about spreading the jam too thin. And I think at times in the past, we've probably spread the jam too thin in the county when it comes to cycle facilities. And what I think we really need to do here is make sure we do produce a really, really solid backbone of a cycle route right through the centre of the county that obviously with the canal route that I just referred to takes in 4 districts straight away. Obviously Stroud, Gloucester, Cheltenham and Tewkesbury. So that route affects all 4 of the districts. So to do that and have a backbone that you can build the other parts from and get people used to riding along that really strong cycle route, I think is the most important thing. Once you've got that movement, then to connect up the bits and pieces, I think again is very important. But I think to get that backbone, and I think that's where that money needs to go, along with anything else I can get in over the next 3 to 6 months to build that pot up to match the money that I'm getting from Highways England to deliver that backbone through the county, not least because of the areas and things it connects, in terms of it connects to 2 hospitals, it connects to 2 railway stations. If it goes down to Stroud, it connects 3, and obviously the university with the halls of residence, and so there's so much along that route that is so important. And if you look at London Road, where we put the first pot in, you can see the sort of quality that's going in there, which we've never done before in Gloucestershire, which is about making sure that we really do emphasise that it's a high quality cycle route and that protects cyclists. And I mean, what we're learning already at London Road is, for years we had speed cameras out in London Road to keep the vehicle speeds down. What we've done is by squeezing the cars into the middle of the road, they feel more threatened. And the vehicle speeds coming, so you get in a platoon of vehicles going through now, and a sort of steady 25 to 30 miles an hour. And what we've also done is remove the islands and put pedestrian facilities in. So in there is a great example of where we've reallocated road space, made a really, really great dedicated cycle route with 2-metre cycle lanes to protect the cyclists, even the wobbly cyclists. At the same time, brought vehicle speeds down and improve cycling facilities, so improve walking facilities. So you can see, I think, how if you properly design it and you're careful, how you can actually achieve a number of objectives all in one go.
Councillor Cromwell?
Yeah, I just want to come back really, because my question also is then, we're short on what we applied for, but from what I understand, in tranche 2, what we actually applied for included all of those smaller schemes. So how much really are we short then? Because if we're not going to do the smaller schemes, we're going to add that money to the bigger scheme. You're saying we need the 11 million, but what do we actually need? Because I was led to believe that tranche 2 included all of the smaller schemes as well.
Tranche 2 did include the smaller schemes because we undertook to include one scheme from each of the districts. The main part of the scheme that was prioritised as our first part, as part of our bid, our main element of our bid, was effectively the B4603, which was for £5 million. The remainder was made up from the small schemes. But as you can see, they're not that smaller schemes. £5 million spread between 6 authorities is, you can see, you're looking at sort of £750,000 per authority.
Councillor Cromwell?
Thank you.
Sorry?
Absolutely fine, thank you.
All right, good, thank you. Your sound was somewhat truncated there. I think I'm moving to Councillor Patel.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question for Colin regarding London Road. It's great to see that that scheme is well and truly progressing, and particularly with the issues and concerns that we had with parking along London Road. We seem to have made a lot of headway there, and it's, we've got that continuous line of a cycle lane almost, particularly where the properties are near the Denmark Road end. So that was good to see. But I'm not sure I agree with you on your point about as a result of the cycle lanes being wider now, the vehicle lanes are narrower now, so vehicles are slowing down. I mean, last Friday afternoon around 3:30, I was driving along London Road from Barnwood Road towards the city centre, and just going down along the London Road stretch where the camera used to be, the car in front of me was going significantly over the speed limit. And because you're right, there was no large vehicles coming on the opposite side of the road, but nonetheless, it's a clear run now from the top of London Road by the Cheltenham Road traffic lights all the way down to where the zebra crossing is by Heathfield Road. So that section of the road, it does still concern me with regard to speeding, and if there's anything we can still look at or consider to reduce speeds, then that would be good, because I think particularly in the evenings you're probably going to find motorists speeding along there, and if you have a cyclist also using the road, it could result in a serious accident. So anything you can look at or consider there would be good. Thank you.
I've asked the team that once we get the scheme, it's too early at the moment, but once we get the scheme in properly, then we will be doing full reviews of the scheme afterwards. And if we feel there's a need to look to put in speed reducing measures in, such as speed camera, then obviously we would do. All I'd say is that the speed camera itself hasn't worked for 5 years. I think it might be 6 years actually. So it didn't even flash in the finish, so it was well and truly past its sell-by date. I think most people knew that was the case. So it'd only be the odd person who wasn't aware of the area who might obey the fact there's a speed camera there. One of whom was me, because I didn't tell me that till he was taking it out. So I was being very, very careful and looking at my speed every time I went past it.
So just to clarify, there's no at this moment in time, there's no plan to reinstall the speed camera along the pavement or anything like that. No.
Not currently, no.
Thank you. Councillor Patel and Colin. At the moment, I can't see any new. Oh, sorry,
Caldwell.
We're back to traditional gestures, Councillor Caldwell. Over to you.
Well, I've had my hand up for some time, so there you go.
Yeah, electronic.
Well, on the street lighting issue, it's interesting to see that Skanska are coming out of that business, and there's likely to be a new contractor. Will there be an involvement for the Highways Procurement Cabinet panel in that process?
I would hope so. I'll look into that and I'll get back to you.
Thank you. And the other question I had was, are things improving at Pike Quarry, where we seem to have a long waiting list compared with other parts of the county?
It is without doubt, John. It is our difficult one, and there has been some improvement. We've done everything. I think we squeezed as much, and we have brought it down quite considerably now. The waiting time, but first one to admit, I think, as is Nigel as lead cabinet member, that Pike is our one sort of thorn in our side. But I mean, having said that, it's still got amazingly positive feedback from the public. Who felt that the booking system was far more preferable to anything we've had previously. So, and what we've done is refine and refine and refine, squeeze the squeeze. And yeah, it might be if we can squeeze an extra few vehicles out, we will. But Pike was the one. I think I'm right in saying that we actually opened up a few extra weekends to try and clear some of the backlog at one point during the summer. So we are aware of that, but it's very difficult to actually overcome it. I'm trying to keep it down to a week if we can, week's lead time.
Yeah, I have had good responses on the present system from people. The one concern was people who didn't have access to the internet, who were unable to make a booking because they were asked to give a email address.
Chairman, can I just mention, John? If I could just come in there, John. There is a telephone helpline.
Yeah, I think the person who raised that with me, I put in contact with an officer, and that particular problem was solved.
But there is generally a telephone helpline that people can use.
I think he tried that and it didn't work, but that's a long time ago now.
Okay.
That's everything from me. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Caldwell. Okay, so now can I just speak directly to Sophie? Because I have some concerns here that clearly there are people raising electronic hands that are not appearing on my screen, and I don't understand why, but there we go. Am I missing anybody at the moment, Sophie?
No, I don't think so, Chair. I haven't got any. It seems to be that the ones you can see, I can't see, and the ones I can see, you can't see. So we'll have to look into that after the meeting. I've not seen this happen before, so we'll take it offline.
Fair enough. So just to check, Councillor Phil Orford, you still have a hand up. Were you looking to come back?
Just Chair, no.
Okay, thank you. And I think I now have a clear screen apart from that. So unless I see any frantic hand gestures at this moment, I will conclude this item and say thank you very much to Colin and for his report and answering those questions. And it doesn't look as though anybody else is gesturing at me, so I will move then. Thank you, everybody. I will move to just item 6, which is...
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The work plan for forthcoming meetings and link that in with the fact that we have an additional meeting now on the 9th, is it? 9th of December, I think, to address the Restoring Rivers motion. So our next meeting is in effect catered for in our work plan. We have that it's been set up specifically for that exercise. The meeting after that is on the 13th of January. At the moment, I think I'm right in saying we don't have any specific items set up for that. And obviously Sophie's nodding, so that seems to be the case. You know, if anybody wants to make any proposals at this stage, please do so. It doesn't, obviously we are meeting again in a few weeks' time, so we can consider that at that point, or at any time in the interim. Does anybody want to make any comment at this point about our work plan? Anybody at all? It doesn't look like it from members. Sophie, do you want to say anything about the work plan, or are you just happy to let it ride at the moment?
Yeah, we've run. I think we've run out of items on the future items list as well. There are two that I think have been around for quite a while. Infrastructure planning and infrastructure south. I'm not quite sure if the committee still want to consider those, and if they do, I'd need a bit of guidance about what they should include.
Fine, and I think I probably should. It's worth noting, of course, that because we're getting to the end of the council as such, and our final meeting as this committee will be in March. I suppose it's understandable that we're moving to this stage, and of course the whole pandemic situation has created problems for us with some of the items that we were intending to address, and things have changed, which is why it's not surprised that really that we now all of a sudden, having gone from a situation where we were struggling to find time to actually address a number of items that members had suggested and brought forward. We were at one point, go back not that long ago, struggling to actually fit everything in. We suddenly find ourselves in exactly the opposite situation. So members, bearing in mind what Sophie has just said and my comments, does anybody want to say anything at this point, or about future items? It doesn't look like it, in which case I suggest then that if anybody has any particular issues that they want to flag up and bring forward, please circulate the committee in an email, and we will revisit this on the 9th of December, if that's, I guess we can do that, Sophie. I know it's a special meeting, but I think that's probably okay, isn't it? Yeah,
that's absolutely fine. Yeah.
Okay, so that's right. Fine. In which case, that's it. Just to note, therefore, then that the next meeting is on the 9th of December, and to thank everybody this morning for your contributions, to thank officers for their reports, and I will now bring this meeting to a close. Thank you very much, everybody.